We're going to move on now to a topic that I'm close to, geographically at least, and one that I've heard a lot about in the Denver area, and one that I know has caught international media attention, and it's about the sad murder of a little girl in Boulder, Colorado on December the 27th, 1997, which to this day still remains unsolved. And, of course, I'm talking about the JonBenet Ramsey murder. The interesting thing is that, and I know this whole controversy has been carried internationally, but especially in the Denver area, there has been numerous talk shows that have talked about this case and the things that have happened. To this date, as I mentioned, no one has ever been arrested for the murder of the little girl, although there's all kinds of allegations that flow around this thing and a lot of confusion and disinformation. But recently, we were treated to an article out of the Boulder Daily Camera here in Colorado about a woman who surfaced living in San Luis Obispo, California, who alleged that she had some knowledge of the people that were around JonBenet Ramsey, including some very good friends of the family, the Fleet White family. And there were allegations raised about some activities that may have contributed to the death of the little girl. Now, recently, the Boulder police have completely dismissed this witness as credible, as not. In other words, they've completely dismissed her story and say that there is no basis in fact. Although, I must say that with what Alex is probably going to talk about tonight, and what I myself suspect, is that this is all part of the ongoing, continuing cover-up to get to the bottom of this, the death of this little girl. But anyway, again, joining me tonight is my guest, Alex Constantine. And Alex, welcome back.
Thank you.
And this is kind of like a sidebar. I'm here in Denver, and, all that action was taking place here.
Right. Well, there's a lot going on in Denver. As a matter of fact, I wrote to the Denver Post a couple of years ago to tell him that there were mind control personnel moving to the Denver area and to expect all sorts of things.
No kidding.
Since that time, yeah. And since that time, I think you have seen all sorts of things.
Well, there's a very weird climate. There's a very weird feeling here in the town nowadays.
Right.
And
I can understand.
And, of course, there's a lot of people living here that are becoming more sensitized to, some of the more outrageous conspiracy theories, who at one time, batted them down as completely nonsense. But all they have to do is go out there to Denver International Airport, and they're treated to some of the most bizarre art I have ever seen.
Oh, I've read about that.
It's all true.
Yeah.
It's just very weird. And
I'm glad you brought the subject of conspiracy theories, because there's one thing I want to make clear, and that is that I write about fascism, which is inherently conspiratorial.
Right.
And a lot of people will tend to write me off as a conspiracy theorist. There's some people who directly attack me, from the other side of this thing.
Sure.
And, I back up what I have to say. I've been doing this for 12 years, saying terrible things about people, and I've never been sued. I back up everything I have to say. And anybody who wants a demonstration of that, welcome just to look at the book.
Well, I'll tell you what I think, and I've seen this too, doing this program for the years that I've been doing it, is that, there was a time when conspiracy theory was relegated to what they always thought or called kooks and crackpots. But, the thing that's interesting is that the tide is turning, because a lot of people who would have poo-pooed any of this are now starting to see that, indeed, conspiracy theory is no longer theory, it's conspiracy fact.
Yeah, much of it is, but at the same time, for every book that I produce or that a legitimate researcher produces, there are 20 out there that are put out by the bad guys.
Sure, and that
tends to confuse things, something awful.
They do a pretty good job of it, I think. But
thank you very much.
That's the thing. Now, let's focus on this JonBenet Ramsey thing, because, again, being in the Denver area, there is a lot of weirdness that circulates around that whole thing, and I'm sure you're probably aware of the recent book that was published by Jim Thomas, who was a former Steve Thomas.
Right.
Who was a former detective with the Boulder Police Department, who has all kinds of bad things to say about the Boulder Police and the district attorney's investigation. Yet
that book is a complete hoax.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, tell me why.
For one thing, Steve Thomas was a narcotics officer. He's not a homicide cop.
Right.
Secondly, he makes preposterous allegations. In order to believe that Patsy Ramsey killed her own daughter and then covered it up, you have to explore what that means, the cover-up. That would entail the sexual abuse of her daughter after she was dead, and choking and beating and so forth, the corpse of her own daughter. And I find that highly unlikely. Secondly, just to give you an example of some of the allegations that he makes, there was a national panel of pediatricians put together, and they concluded unanimously that JonBenet Ramsey had a history of sexual abuse.
Right.
Steve Thomas, the narcotics cop, second gets this national panel of experts on the subject. He poo-poos the whole idea and claims that the injuries, sexual injuries that JonBenet exhibited were the result of her mother beating on her, which is, just preposterous.
Right, I agree 100% with you. Okay, hold that. We're going to go take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to pick up on how you got involved in this mystery.
All right.
And we're going to hear about your research into it and your dealings with the people surrounding the mysterious witness that has surfaced.
Fantastic.
Okay, 16. My guest tonight is Alex Constantine, and we're covering a very disturbing topic right now: the death of JonBenet Ramsey in 1997, the unsolved death of JonBenet Ramsey, and very interesting. I want to thank Alex too in advance for giving us 2 hours of his valuable time, and it's guests like Alex that make this program so interesting. And thank you, Alex, very much.
Sweet.
Now let's kind of move on to how you got involved, because I know, again, this kind of story starts here in Denver with a call you received from a reporter with I believe it was Westward, wasn't it?
His name is Joe Calhoun. He's there in the Denver area. He's a local reporter, and he received an Academy Award for his work on the Panama Deception.
Right. And
he's been following the JonBenet case since the very beginning. And he called me first, I think, in April of this year. February, I believe. And, I listened to him and talked to him. We compared notes. And then he called me again on March 22nd and said he was in town. He was going to stop by. So half hour later, he shows up with this file, which had loads of information in it, a lot of police interviews, transcriptions, all sorts of background material. And I learned a lot about the JonBenet case that the police aren't talking about because the police have been too busy trying to frame innocent people.
Okay.
Now, the whole problem here is that everybody assumes the Ramseys are lying. We've been hearing this for 3 years. But nobody has suggested that perhaps the police are lying, and that's the whole problem here. Now, there's a man by the name of Fleet White you may be familiar with.
Very familiar with him.
Friend of the Ramseys.
Right.
This is what he wrote in his letter to the people of Colorado, and I quote, "It is our firm belief that the district attorney and others intend to use the grand jury and its secrecy in an attempt to protect their careers and also serve the conflicting interests of powerful, influential, and threatening people who have something to hide or protect," end quote. So I'm not the only one who knows about this.
Okay.
Calhoun, now, all the information that I have on the suspect, his name is Paul Schultz, comes from Joe Calhoun and his file. Where did the file originate? It begins with a professor at the University of Colorado in Denver who was investigating the JonBenet case, and his superiors at the University of Colorado told him to knock off the investigation or he'd lose his job.
Can you name him?
No, I can't.
Okay, all right.
I'd like to, but I can't.
All right.
So the file ended up in the hands of Joe Calhoun, who attended every press conference on the JonBenet case and had picked up every scrap that he could find. And he turns up here hoping to recruit me to help him expose this whole thing.
Okay.
So that's why I'm here tonight.
All right.
Now, I mentioned a guy by the name of Paul Schultz. Well, the allegation comes from his wife, his ex-wife, a woman by the name of Belinda Schultz, who was married to him briefly. They had a son. The son was sexually abused, according to her allegations, by friends of Paul Schultz, who was pimping the child to pedophiles and that kind of thing.
Right.
Paul Schultz had a homosexual lover who was with the CIA. He was an explosives expert. And both of these guys were killers who worked alternately for the Mafia and the CIA. Also, there is a whole series of people associated with these two, and they're named in the affidavits as well.
Now, when you talk about Paul Schultz, he is in your eyes, he is a suspect
Right.
in the murder of the little girl.
Right.
Okay, set the stage for us then on this particular thing, because did they actually kidnap her from the house, or how did all this take place?
Well, first of all, Paul Schultz is part of a circle of people. We're talking sex ring allegations here.
Okay.
And there was an entire book done by a reporter named Steven Singular, and Lawrence Schiller and some of the others who are covering this case up will ridicule, any allegation of sex ring activity.
Uh-huh.
There was, all sorts of indications of organized activity. There was a man in Columbus, Ohio, who was wanted for the murder of a girl in Colorado, as a matter of fact. They went to his house to arrest him. They found a collection of child pornography, and in that collection they found a picture of JonBenet Ramsey.
Is this the fellow that was ultimately charged with the death of the girl from Idaho Springs?
That was a girl by the name of Beth Miller,
right.
I believe.
Yes.
And I know that he was arrested. He's being tried. I haven't heard anything about the outcome of that trial. But the police in Columbus, Ohio, contacted the Boulder police because they believed there was a connection.
Okay.
And the Boulder police told them they weren't interested.
Really?
They didn't want anything to do with it. As a matter of fact, during the investigation, there were pictures of JonBenet, in compromising positions, sold on the Internet. And the police weren't interested in that either. And you mentioned Mary Biankowski, who was a therapist.
Right.
She had a client living in Boulder who was, her godmother was the mother of Fleet White, so she knows, this circle of people intimately. And she contacted the police and wanted to talk to them about this sex ring activity. Well, all the Boulder police were interested in was discrediting her allegations.
Now, is this the mysterious witness that came from San Luis Obispo that the cops recently interviewed?
Well, her therapist is in San Luis Obispo.
But she's here in Boulder.
Yeah, she's in Boulder.
Oh, I didn't know. Okay.
And the girl has never been named by the media. Now, the Mary Biankowski, the therapist, alleges that the police were only interested in discrediting the allegations. They had no interest in collecting the information.
Which ultimately they did.
Pardon me?
Which ultimately they did.
Yes, they did.
2 days ago, they announced on the news that that whole thing was discredited by the police. They found no evidence of it.
Well, they worked very hard at discrediting that evidence.
I found it very interesting, though, that Alex Hunter, when this allegation surfaced, Alex Hunter tendered his not resignation, but he said, "I'm not going to run for office again."
Isn't that fascinating?
Yes, it sure is. I'm wondering if it's related to this.
Right. Well, Mary Biankowski has had death threats left on her message machine. As a matter of fact, there are 5 threats left.
Really? Okay.
So there's somebody very interested in this case and keeping it hushed up.
Okay, my guest tonight is Alex Constantine. We're talking now about the JonBenet Ramsey murder that occurred in Boulder, 1997. And Alex, before we went to break, we were talking about various things that got you involved in this and some of the things you found, including Paul Schultz and those types of things. I'd like to ask you if you could help me out here with piecing some of this together. Would it be fair to say that even though Patsy Ramsey may not have murdered her daughter and done the things that people are alleging, I gather from what your evidence or your information you're developing kind of basically supports the idea that the family was involved.
I really can't say that.
Okay.
I think it's impossible to conclude, to what extent the family was everything.
Okay.
The JonBenet was, as you know, she was involved in these pageants.
Right.
And she was taken to dance classes and to the hairdresser and all sorts of places where she was away from her parents. So if there was any sexual abuse involved, and unanimously, according to a panel of experts, pediatricians, she had a history of abuse. How lengthy that history is, I can't say. How often she'd been sexually abused, I can't say.
Does the information that we have that's publicly released about the girl's death occurring in the house, did it occur in the house, or is there something else going on here?
I think that's another matter for conjecture. I can't say. I believe it took place in the house. The Paul Schultz, who's my suspect in this case, installed air conditioning. And we do know that JonBenet's father was renovating the house, so it's possible that he was involved in that renovation and maybe had a key to the house.
So none of the way your research bears out is the possibility that Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey had no knowledge of any of this.
Yeah, it's very possible they had nothing to do with anything that was happening to JonBenet.
Now, how does Fleet White fit into this? Because Fleet White was John Ramsey's best friend.
Well, as I mentioned, he seems to have some insight into all this, but he hasn't gone public with that knowledge. But he has publicly stated that the police are protecting important and, quote, threatening people in the area.
Now, this witness that has come forward, the client of Bienkowski,
yes.
What is her story? What is she alleging is occurring here?
Well, she has a client who says that the client says that she had been subjected to some of the sex ring activity in the area and believes that she knows who was there when JonBenet was killed and gave the police a list of names. Now, as I mentioned, the police aren't interested in really solving this case. Henry Lee's been brought in, and he's announced that there are no leads. The case is cold. It isn't cold by any means. And some of these other people, for instance, Lawrence Schiller, who was the ramrod behind the miniseries on the JonBenet case.
Right.
Well, this guy has a history of covering up CIA mafia activity going all the way back to the Kennedy assassination.
Uh-huh.
As a matter of fact, there was a book that came out in 1967, I believe, and it was called Scavengers and Critics of the Warren Commission, and that was based on the so-called work of Lawrence Schiller.
Uh-huh, right.
So he's been around doing this for a while.
It's kind of interesting he's involved in this.
Yes, it is. Well, it's interesting. They bring this battery of people involved in the O.J. Simpson case, which is another one. The activity behind the Simpson case makes it the hottest case that I'm aware of.
Now, does this witness, when this witness talks about Fleet White,
yes,
the Boulder Daily Camera article that I read on this kind of implicated Fleet White or his family.
Well, there's been a lot of implication here, hasn't there?
There sure has.
Based on very little evidence.
And it's very confusing because it's conflicting.
Well, look at the things that they bring up. You have a flashlight found in the house with no fingerprints on it.
Right.
Well, somehow that's supposed to be attached to Patsy Ramsey when, if anything, that flashlight is an indication that somebody got into the house and needed a flashlight.
Mm-hmm.
If Patsy Ramsey had committed the murder, she wouldn't need a flashlight. Right? Somebody did.
Right. You're right. And
so what does that have to do with Patsy Ramsey? All these things are turned upside down, and the parent, first it was, JonBenet's father, and then it was her brother, and now it's her mother. And the police keep coming out with these ridiculous allegations, and behind it you have solid leads that the police have been ignoring all along.
Right.
And Steve Thomas comes out with his cover-up book.
Right. Right.
So it's pretty, as I say, the cover-up proves the conspiracy. And I think the more you look into the sex ring angle, the more you're going to find.
Okay, let's delve into the sex ring angle.
All right.
What do we know about it?
Well, we know that Paul Schultz had connections. He had friends. One was a producer down in Texas by the name of Huey Moe, and that's spelled M-E-A-U-X.
Okay.
Who served a prison sentence for several years for his involvement in child pornography and for raping kids and that kind of thing. Another one was a distributor, and according to Belinda Schultz, the distributor is a guy by the name of Jerry J. Moore, who's a Houston real estate developer. He recently sold his company for $400 million, so the guy is stinking rich,
mm-hmm.
right? And now he has a history of involvement with S&Ls. He took millions of dollars, right, from a bank called the First National Bank of Bel Air, Texas. He also received $50,000 in title insurance premiums, and that's how he built up his empire. And Jerry J. Moore is connected to the George W. Bush crowd, so you can understand why they're keeping all this quiet.
It's interesting, too, because some of those connections go into the Franklin cover-up thing.
Well, it's very interesting. It's a lot like the Franklin cover-up.
It is in a lot of ways.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. You
also have a woman by the name of Tweet Kimball,
uh-huh.
right, who owned a castle in Sedalia, just off US 85.
I know exactly where that is. It's a spooky place.
Well, she came by that castle because she divorced a man by the name of Merritt Rudock, who was a very high-ranking CIA official. As a matter of fact, he was the deputy of Frank Wisner, who oversaw the part of the CIA that brought Nazis into the United States. Now, according to the Washington Post, the CIA brought 5,000 Nazis and East European Quislings to this country after the war. And Merritt Rudock, Tweet Kimball's ex-husband, was very involved in that. He was Wisner's immediate deputy.
Mm-hmm. Now, now Tweet Kimball recently passed away, didn't she?
Yes, she did.
Now, I'm curious, how does she fit into all of this?
Well, her husband bought her that castle to keep her quiet. He told her that she could have any property she wanted as long as she kept her mouth shut, so she got the castle.
Okay.
That castle is stocked. She slept in the bed of Charles II, has first editions of books by Charles Dickens and Tennyson, people like that. She was a very rich woman, and she kept her mouth shut her whole life. She was involved, according to Belinda Schultz, with Paul Schultz, who was involved in a cult in the Denver area.
Oh, okay. Hold that thought. When we come back, I want to pick up on that right there where we live off. 3:03 went to break. Alex kind of mentioned that there is a cult in the Denver area that this Paul Schultz may be connected to. It kind of disturbs me because I'm in the Denver area. Anyway, Alex, what can you tell us more about that?
Well, a year after the murder, in 1997, the Boulder PD contacted a company in Berwyn, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And two executives worked on an examination of forensic evidence. Their names are Dale Yeager and Denise Noak. And according to sales brochure for Seraph Incorporated, they say, quote, they're an international company with extensive sources throughout Europe, South America, the Middle East, Asia, and so on. They also note that, quote, our associates are investigative professionals and former intelligence officers, which is about what you'd expect to find.
Right.
Now, they claim that Patsy Ramsey did it. And, of course, they have a lot of hokey reasons why. And they note that in fact, they're the ones who came up with the reference to Psalm 118, right, in the Bible.
Right.
And they said Patsy Ramsey is religious. She reads the Bible. Maybe she was, depending on this part in the Psalm 118.
Uh-huh. And
now, that's a reference to, supposedly also to the money that JonBenet's father received, $118,000, right?
Right.
And the part in the Bible that they're quoting is this, quote, decorate the festival with leafy boughs and bind the sacrifices to be offered with thick cords to the horns of the altar, end quote. Now, the Seraph Incorporated notes in their conclusions that psalm, that particular Psalm 118, is very well known to white supremacists, because they quote it as a justification for murdering their enemies and that kind of thing. So we do know that a white supremacist, would be referring to this psalm, and as a matter of fact, Paul Schultz is a white supremacist.
Isn't that interesting? And is Paul Schultz, is he based in the Denver area?
He's in prison at the time for child abuse, aggravated child abuse, in the Houston area.
But he was in the Denver area?
Yes, he was. He traveled back and forth.
Because the reason I asked that is because, you mentioned that Tweet Kimball's, her husband?
Yes.
Was connected to him somehow.
That was Merritt Rudock, who was with the Office of Policy Coordination, which was the branch of the CIA that brought Nazis into the country after the war. Now,
help connect the dots here.
Pardon me?
Help me connect the dots here. You've got Huey Moe, you've got Jerry J. Moore, Tweet Kimball,
right,
and Paul Schultz.
Now, Tweet Kimball, her father, allegedly had something to do with the formation of the Ku Klux Klan after World War I.
Here in the United States?
Yes. In Tennessee.
In Tennessee. Now, I'm curious about how do these people come to become focused on a little girl named JonBenet Ramsey?
Well, the child pornography industry is very lucrative. Just one videotape, of child sex can sell for $5,000. So that becomes of interest to organized crime. And, of course, Paul Schultz was a hitman for the mafia, so that figures.
It does. It's very interesting, too.
Yes.
Now, there was some point, I remember, in the investigation and the stuff that was coming out here in the local area and the news coverage here, that at some point they sent detectives to the Ramseys' home in Charlevoix, Michigan, looking for what they believed was pornography or connections to pornography.
Yeah.
Did anything ever come out of that?
Nope.
Nothing.
And they've been ignoring, like I said, there were pictures of JonBenet being sold on the internet, and they weren't interested in that.
Were these pictures of her nude, or were
they?
Good heavens.
Now, where the hell are those pictures coming from?
Right, exactly.
Nobody's interested in solving that problem. And that's, like I say, everybody assumes the Ramseys are lying, and no one has suggested that the police are lying.
Why do you think the Ramseys are reluctant to cooperate with the police? Is it because of the fact that they know that the police department is basically corrupt or involved somehow?
Look at the way they've been handled. They hire an attorney to protect themselves from all these insidious allegations, and that's held up as evidence of murder.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you would do the same thing, so would I.
Well, I think
any move they make is interpreted as complicity.
And I think, a lot of people would agree that, even though they may not be guilty of a crime,
right,
that the police may, if they have indications of it, which it's, this whole thing has been strange.
Yes, it has.
They may be fearful of a frame-up.
Yes, very fearful. There are people look at the lawsuits that have been mounting around this thing because of false allegations.
Right.
Right?
Uh-huh.
It's just ridiculous when the hardcore evidence is sitting right here. There are all sorts of indications of organized activity.
Mm-hmm.
Linda Arndt, you remember her? The
yes.
detective who showed up at the scene, first
right.
one there. She opens her door one day and finds blood spattered all over it.
See, these things kind of sound like satanic...
Yes, it does, doesn't it?
It does, because I know that... for example, you mentioned Linda Arndt. She had blood splattered on her house. Steve Thomas had a dead cat in front of his house.
Yep.
And one of the other investigators was shot at through his bedroom window.
4 times he almost got hit.
Yeah.
Now, is that, who's doing that? Patsy Ramsey?
No, and again, these kinds of things start to sound like satanic crimes.
Yes, it does. It all works together beautifully once you're on the right track, right? Right up to Lawrence Schiller.
Right.
And it's frustrating as hell because the media's keeping all of this out. They censor all of this, and they run with these ridiculous allegations, to make Patsy Ramsey look guilty.
Okay, paint for us your best guess or your scenario, your theory about what happened.
Well, okay, you mentioned the Satanism angle.
Right.
The suspect that I've been discussing here is a friend of Michael Aquino, who's the head of the Temple of Set in San Francisco. Right? That's a satanic sect.
Right.
Right? We've got connections here that work. Right? But the police aren't interested in investigating all of this because, as I mentioned, Paul Schultz is in the same circle as George W. Bush, who's running for president.
So basically, what you're saying here is that this, just like the Franklin cover-up, for example, goes to very, very high places.
Right. And it may sound ridiculous until you get into the details and you start digging and find out who these people are, right, making these ridiculous allegations, and it all works.
Now, you mentioned just a second ago Michael Aquino.
Right.
How does he fit into this somehow?
Well, he was charged with the molestation of 60 children.
At the Presidio.
At the Presidio in San Francisco.
Right.
The Army covered the whole thing up, but they had a secret hearing in which they found the charges credible, and Michael Aquino was drummed out of the Army.
Supposedly,
right?
Yeah.
Now, the public has been conditioned to think satanic crime doesn't happen or something, or the kids aren't ritually abused.
Right.
And I've looked into people making those allegations at the press. Many of them are connected. Many of them have criminal backgrounds and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Some of them are intelligence operatives. And the public has been brainwashed into believing that ritual abuse doesn't happen. Well, it begins to look like JonBenet was a ritual abuse victim.
Sure does. It does have, seems like all the, the circumstances surrounding it.
Including the strangulation. Now, that was the cause of death, according to Cyril Wecht, who's one of the top forensic people in the country.
Right.
Now, he says the cause of death was strangulation. There was a cord around her neck, and that was used in this sort of activity. It's very often used to control the victim, right? It's not to kill the victim, it's to control them.
Right.
In the act of sexual assault.
Okay, is our number, and my guest tonight is Alex Constantine, and we're about out of time. Again, Alex, I want to thank you very much for being on the program.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's been a very enjoyable 2 hours with you, and real quick, going back to Biankowski's client, what are the things that she said about this whole thing? Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
I said, what other things has she said about this whole thing?
What other things that she said?
Yeah.
She stated that the police were only interested in discrediting her and her patient. She said that she has received 5 messages on her machine, and I have those here, threatening her and telling her to back off from the case and stop contacting people.
Right.
And to leave the girl alone. Now, who's making those phone calls? Is that Patsy Ramsey?
I don't think so.
Is that Dr. Cyril Wecht, perhaps?
No, absolutely not.
Anybody who pursues the sex ring allegations ends up discredited.
What about the safety of this girl? Now, I know that this thing was supposed to be handled, in a somewhat careful, discreet fashion, and somebody leaked it to the press that she was doing this.
Right. Well, the girl's disappeared.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I think they're sitting on her, at the very least.
Uh-huh. Wow.
See, that's what I mean. This whole thing is being covered up.
Well, I want to thank you again for being on the program, because we're about out of time, but it's been
You're very welcome.
Very enjoyable. And I also want to mention that you have published a book. It's now coming out. It's available on the web at feralhouse.com, www.feralhouse, feralhouse.com. And the name of the book is The Covert War Against Rock. And Alex, you've always been a very interesting guest. Keep up the good research. And do you ever foresee a time when you might publish a book on this topic?
On the JonBenet case?
Yeah.
It's possible. I've got an essay on it posted in the Usenet news groups. So anybody who wants to download that article is welcome to it.
Okay, very good. Okay, Alex, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.